Good morning, and welcome to today's hearing examining qualifications of two individuals nominated to serve as members of the U.S. Chemical Safety and Hazard Investigations Board, or CSB. One of whom, Stephen Owens, is currently serving on the board as interim chairman, but has been nominated by President Biden to fill that position for a full term. For more than 2 decades, the CSB has been responsible for investigating industrial chemical accidents at fixed industrial facilities. This small agency and its team of investigators, consisting of chemical and mechanical engineers, industrial safety experts, and other specialists with experience in the private and public sectors, decide what accidents to investigate and get to the root causes. They then offer recommendations to facilities, local and state governments, regulatory agencies, industry organizations, and labor groups on how to fix and avoid similar incidents. Their mission is to drive chemical safety change through these recommendations, and they have a long record of doing so. The agency has investigated over 100 accidents, from large explosions that destroyed communities to small releases in labs and isolated work sites. And for many years, this agency was considered to be the global gold standard in conducting industrial accident investigations. We know, however, that the agency and the dedicated men and women within it have faced more than their fair share of challenges in fully carrying out their mission and duties over the past few years. The previous administration attempted to zero out the budget, but refused to nominate replacements for board members whose 5-year terms had expired. As a result, the agency only has 9 dedicated investigators today, less than half the 24 once employed by the CSB. In addition, a number of vacancies in key staff positions have kept the agency from being able to fully utilize the resources provided to them by Congress, leading to a backlog of incomplete investigations. This situation, purposely created, is unconscionable and inexcusable for an agency vital to preventing industrial catastrophe. One article from 2016 quotes Trish Karen, the Australian director of the Institution of Chemical Engineers Safety Center, as saying, "The rest of the world is jealous of the CSB. We wish we had one because its purpose is to investigate and understand what happened, not because of community pressure or for the purpose of prosecution." The good news is that under the administration, the Biden administration, there is still a good ways to go, but I believe the situation at the U.S. Chemical Safety and Hazard Investigations Board is improving. At the end of last year, the Senate confirmed 2 of President Biden's nominees, Sylvia Johnson and Steve Owens, to fill vacancies on the board and return it to a functioning quorum. These leaders have taken it upon themselves to try to rejuvenate the board, bring on new staff, conduct listening sessions to hear the concerns of current and former staff and former board members. And just last month, the CSB released final reports on 2 concluded investigations, along with updates on 4 more ongoing investigations, demonstrating their ongoing commitment to addressing the backlog. It's critical that here in the Senate we help them in these efforts. Towards that end, we will hear today from 2 nominees who have the potential to contribute greatly to these efforts to restore and revitalize the board. Steve Owens currently serves as a member and the interim chairman of the U.S. Board since his confirmation last December. He is currently nominated for a full term as chairman. Since being sworn in, he has worked to increase transparency and information sharing, identifying ways to reduce the backlog, and increase collaboration and communications between agency leadership and CSB career professional staff and stakeholders. Professor Catherine Sandoval is a tenured law professor at Santa Clara University, where she teaches and conducts research on energy, communications, antitrust, and contract law. A regulatory and legal expert for over 3 decades, a safety leader for more than 2 decades, Professor Sandoval's interdisciplinary work advances infrastructure safety, reliability, access, and equity. In addition, Professor Sandoval has served a 6-year term as a commissioner of the California Public Utilities Commission, to which she was appointed by Governor Brown and unanimously confirmed by the California State Senate. During her prior federal service, she served as director of the Office of Communications Business Opportunities at the Federal Communications Commission. Former California Governor Davis appointed her to serve as Undersecretary and Senior Policy Advisor for Housing, and before that as Staff Director of California's Business, Transportation, and Housing Agency. In that capacity, she worked with law enforcement, including the California Highway Patrol, to respond to infrastructure vulnerabilities and hazardous incidents. It's quite a variety of responsibilities, quite a breadth of experience. I'd like to thank both of our nominees for being here with us today. And now I'll turn it over to our ranking member, Roger Wicker.
Thank you, Chairman Merkley. I want to welcome our two nominees today. Steve Owens has been nominated to serve as the chair of the Chemical Safety and Hazard Investigation Board, or CSB. I learned that he is a Memphis boy and grew up right up the highway from me in where I grew up in North Mississippi. Mr. Owens appeared before the subcommittee last year when he was first nominated to be a member of CSB, and he was confirmed by the Senate for that position last December. Catherine Sandoval, who has been nominated to be a member of the CSB, is also with us this morning. I appreciate their willingness to serve. As the chair mentioned, the CSB is an independent, non-regulatory agency charged with investigating the root causes of chemical accidents at industrial facilities. Congress created the CSB to investigate accidents, understand what went wrong, and help prevent them from happening again. This investigative work is vital for the safety of our nation's communities. Since becoming operational in 1998, the CSB has investigated 3 accidents that occurred in my state of Mississippi. A 2002 explosion injured 3 workers. A 2006 explosion killed 3 contractors and seriously injured another. And a 2016 explosion occurred, in which fortunately no one was hurt. The CSB works to investigate these types of incidents in order to prevent them from happening again. This work is vitally important and can save lives. It is therefore critical that the board be filled with experts in chemical process safety. Today's hearing presents an opportunity to hear from each of these nominees about their qualifications for this important role. I look forward to getting to know them and hearing more about their experiences. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, Senator Wicker. And we'll start with Stephen Owens. The floor is yours.
But thank you, Mr. Chairman. If I may, at the beginning of it, introduce some members of my family who are with me as well. My wife, Karen Owens, is behind me to my left, and my son, Ben Owens, is behind me to my right. So, Mr. Chairman and Ranking Member Wicker and members of the subcommittee, thank you for holding this hearing and inviting me to be here today. It's good to see you again, both of you. And Senator Wicker, I didn't get a chance to say hello, but hopefully we'll get a chance to chat before the end of the hearing, so good to see you as well. I'm extremely honored to be nominated by President Biden to be the chairperson of the Chemical Safety and Hazard Investigation Board. I've been a member of the board since February of this year, confirmed by the Senate last December. I became the board's interim executive authority in July after our former chairperson resigned. As I said when I appeared before you last year, the CSB is a very small agency, but it has a very big and very important mission: to conduct investigations and make recommendations that help ensure that chemical facilities are operated safely and that the people who work in them and the families who live near them are protected from chemical disasters. Since I've been the interim executive, I've worked very closely with my fellow board member, Sylvia Johnson, and the dedicated career public servants at the CSB to address the serious challenges facing the agency, including reducing the backlog in investigation reports, addressing staff vacancies, improving morale, breaking down silos, and increasing communications between CSB leadership and career staff. For example, since last July, we've released the final reports for 3 investigations: the fatal 2017 explosion at the Loy Lang Box Company in St. Louis, the fatal 2016 fire at the Sunoco terminal in Nederland, Texas, and the 2019 fire and explosions at the PES refinery in Philadelphia. Prior to issuing the Loy Lang report in late July, the CSB had not released an investigation report in over 10 months. Going forward, we anticipate releasing the final reports for another 3 investigations by the end of this calendar year. In the last few years, the CSB has suffered serious attrition among our investigative and other critical staff and fell to one of the lowest levels of career staff in its history. Since I've been the interim executive, we've hired a new chief information officer to address the serious cybersecurity and information technology issues plaguing the CSB, and we'll be adding other IT staff soon. We onboarded a new chemical incident investigator and plan to hire several more in the months ahead. We also hired 2 recommendation specialists, and we are recruiting other key staff as well. Additionally, in September, we deployed a team to investigate the fatal fire and explosion at the BP Husky refinery in Ohio. This was the first deployment that the CSB had undertaken in 14 months. We've also increased transparency and are providing more information to the public and our stakeholders. For example, we've begun to post data on chemical incidents that we receive under the agency's reporting rule. We've also reinstituted public comments at CSB board meetings. And in September, we issued updates on 4 investigations, including the 2020 fatal fire and explosion at the Optima Bell facility in West Virginia, and the fatal 2021 liquid nitrogen release at the Foundation Food Group facility in Georgia. The agency had stopped providing these updates last year, but we believe that they provide important information to the public and stakeholders. In the next few weeks, we plan to issue an update on another investigation, the fatal 2021 explosion and fire at the Yinkin Majestic facility in Ohio. The Chemical Safety Board began operations in January 1998. As we approach the 25th anniversary of the CSB, I am very optimistic about the agency's future. I strongly believe that we can rebuild and revitalize the CSB and perform our mission as Congress intended. I look forward to working with this committee to do that. Thank you again, Mr. Chairman and Ranking Member Wicker, for the opportunity to appear before you, and I'll be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you very much. Ms. Sandoval?
Thank you very much. I'd like to begin by introducing my family, my husband, Steve Smith, my sister, Barbara Sandoval, and also my family friends, Dita Skatagi and Janelle Trigg. So thank you so much. Senators, thank you for this opportunity to discuss my nomination to serve as a member of the U.S. Chemical Safety and Hazard Investigation Board. I'd also like to thank President Biden for the honor of this nomination and to thank my family, particularly my husband, Steve, my sister, Barbara, my late sister, Ana Lugo, my father, Vernon Cassay, and my friends, colleagues, and Santa Clara University for their support and encouragement of my safety leadership work. In the decades before the CSB was founded, prior to the Clean Air Act, and before the establishment of the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, my great-uncle, Ishmael Martinez, was killed in a chemical explosion at the Apache Powder Company near Benson, Arizona. Apache powder made nitroglycerin-based dynamite used in the mines near my mother's hometown, a small town served by a rural electric utility. My mother, Maria Elena Martina Sandoval Cassay, who watches this hearing from heaven, my Uncle Juan and Aunt Tina often talked about the fear and dread they felt as the explosion rocked the town. Fear became shock and sadness as they learned that several workers were killed in the blast, including Tio Ishmael, who lived with their family. A joint funeral mass and the birth and naming of my cousin Ishmael, better known as Smiles, in memory of my great-uncle, began the journey towards community healing. That company operates today as Apache Nitrogen Products, making ammonium nitrate-based products through safety management systems now required by OSHA and EPA rules. As my family's history illustrates, the CSB's mission to protect people and the environment through independent investigations and recommendations that drive chemical safety is vital to communities, families, workers, the environment, and the economy. The chemical incidents the CSB investigates are often lose-lose-lose calamities. They may injure or kill workers, cause community harms, including injury, death, and property damage and loss of job opportunities, release hazardous chemicals into the environment, and generate losses for investors and insurers. The CSB's root cause analysis can create quadruple wins. If honored by Senate confirmation, I would bring to the CSB more than 30 years of regulatory and legal experience, 2 decades of safety leadership, and expertise as a tenured energy, communications, antitrust, and contracts law professor. My collaborative management experience from multi-billion-dollar budget organizations would contribute to effective CSB operations. As a former commissioner of the California Public Utilities Commission and former undersecretary and staff director of California's Business Transportation and Housing Agency, I gained experience in collaborative response to chemical incidents. My CPUC colleagues and I responded to the largest industrial methane leak in U.S. history at the Aliso Canyon Natural Gas Storage Facility in Los Angeles, California. To address the safety, air pollution, and energy challenges this 2015 incident created, We listened to communities, worked with stakeholders, and engaged with experts to conduct a root cause analysis and adopt responsive measures. That investigation built on expertise developed in responding to the 2010 natural gas explosion in San Bruno, California, caused by Pacific Gas and Electric. That methane explosion killed 8 people and leveled a neighborhood. The CPUC's root cause analysis examined the pipeline's metallurgy, including welding, process safety, and human factors, including record-keeping, operational deficiencies, risk identification, and management. These experiences in my work with the California Highway Patrol in responding to a refinery incident when I was BTH staff director and undersecretary highlight the importance of safety management and operational integrity. My experience in working with first responders during and following incidents and in developing policy with first responder input would be an asset to CSB investigations and safety recommendations. My work with underserved and disadvantaged rural, urban, and tribal communities would enhance CSB community collaboration. My approach to CSB investigations would be driven by the facts and by science and faithful to the agency's statutory safety mission. If I were to earn the honor of Senate confirmation, I would serve the CSB and the American people with dedication and diligence. Thank you very much for this opportunity.
Thank you for the testimony from both of you. And Mr. Owens, since this is a nomination for you to serve as chair, and I noted in my opening remarks that the staff has been quite short. I know you've been working in the interim capacity. How much progress so far? Do you have the funding that you need to be able to hire the number of investigators you need? Is the backlog getting worse or better? What would it take to make it better?
Senator, I was going to ask how much time we have to talk about that today. I could talk all day about this.
Concisely.
But I'll be concise. The answer is we have very concrete plans to hire additional staff. As I mentioned, we've already hired recommendation specialist, chief information officer, and a new incident investigator. We are currently in the process of advertising. I don't think it's been posted yet for another 4 to 5 chemical incident investigators. What my colleague Sylvia Johnson and I did after I became the interim executive is sit down with our budget staff and identify what are the priority positions that we needed to hire. We prioritize, obviously, chemical incident investigators and IT staff as the 2 highest. Recommendation specialists go along with that. Under the current funding that we have, under the continuing resolution, we should be able to accomplish all of that over the next several months. Keeping our fingers crossed on the appropriations bills that are currently pending in front of both the House and the Senate, which would increase funding for the CSB, which would enable us to bring on additional chemical incident investigators as well as other much-needed staff in our administrative offices like HR, finance, contracting, and a few other positions that would support our legal team responding to FOIA requests as well as helping on other mission-critical activities. Our challenge is, as you've noted, is that there's been a great loss of experienced personnel at the agency. We do have less than half the number of investigators that we had not that long ago, less than 10 years ago. The backlog is enormous. We've reduced it by 3 already. We plan to reduce it by another 3 by the end of this calendar year, but that's still going to leave us with 11 more reports that we anticipate being able to issue by the end of the next calendar year, and we posted a plan on that. But if we can get additional funding, then we'll be able to hire the additional investigators to do that and clear up that backlog.
So just to summarize, how many investigators do you have right now?
Well, at the moment, depends on how you count them, but we have 10 in the field investigators, I'll call that, plus 2 supervisors and then a 3rd person. So anywhere from 10 to 13. The people who actually go out and do the heavy lifting in the field, we have about 10 of those.
And how many more do you need?
Well, my goal would be to get it up to at least 20.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Sandoval, you really answered my question, which was to highlight the 2 or 3 things that make you a very good fit for this position. So I won't ask you to repeat those. They were in your testimony. But how did you hear about the position? How did you become interested in serving on this board?
Well, thank you, Senator. So the White House asked me if I would be interested, given my energy expertise and my experience in responding to chemical safety incidents. We honor the victims of the San Bruno natural gas explosion by recognizing the chemical safety, energy, and utility regulation failures that leveled a neighborhood. And as you know, it's something that we talk about in my energy law class that I tell students that they get a bonus class, in part looking at the science, because much of energy as well as water work marches through the periodic table in dealing with hydrocarbons and other types of chemicals. So I have experience in responding to a variety of chemical incidents, and then also looking at the process safety, human factors, and material factors that caused failures.
You know, as you were talking, I was thinking about Roseburg, Oregon. Roseburg, Oregon, the entire downtown was leveled by an explosion when I was a child. I just remember seeing the charred city blocks. It wasn't actually a factory. It was a truck, a chemical truck that was left parked, and then a fire at an adjacent building blew it up, and it blew up the town. I think that's probably outside the purview of the CSB, but it sticks in my mind of the destructive power that can occur when chemicals are not carefully managed. Let me turn this over to my colleague.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Sandoval, on the Aliso Canyon natural gas storage facility, the largest industrial methane leak in U.S. history. Tell us a little about that. We don't have a lot of time. Were there any injuries?
So, I hesitate because it's a little, the causation has been hotly debated and is still currently being litigated.
Okay, so
But there's a nearby neighborhood
the
where
question of the causation is still up in the air.
So there's a nearby neighborhood where several people complained about nosebleeds and headaches, and they have entered into a settlement with the natural gas utility that ran that field. That particular field didn't have any homes on top of it or structures on top of it other than what was needed to run the natural gas facility. But the homes that were approximately 1.5 miles away with some of the fumes from the methane leak, as well as some of the other hydrocarbons, CO2 and other things incident to that field, they complained of nosebleeds and headaches. And in fact, many of them were evacuated for a time.
Okay.
It was,
You mentioned root cause analysis. Do you have an opinion about the root cause?
Yes, and the root cause analysis for that incident has been completed. It was a tremendous methane flare, and actually the son of Red Adair came to help to put it out. It took a long time to kill the well, as they said, and finally that happened through some great ingenuity. And then ultimately it was found that corrosion in the natural gas pipeline, which happened through microbial corrosion from water leaking down through the ground, was part of what caused the leak in the pipeline. And then actually the water, the CO2 in the pipeline nourished the water and made the leak worse. And then the methane leaked throughout the field, right, as will happen geologically because methane is lighter than air, so it seeks to escape. So this is why the plume from Aliso Canyon was visible from NASA satellites. And so it's an example where these chemical incidents have tremendous impacts on the environment, as well as having impacts on public health, and also secondary impacts, in this case, on energy. It was the largest natural gas storage facility in the Los Angeles basin, so it had impacts and consequences for energy safety and reliability. So we had to manage the public safety issues as well as the environmental issues and the energy issues while working with the community and with experts.
Is it still functional?
Yes, it is.
Okay.
So,
well, thank you. Let me just ask you, Mr. Owens, a key aspect of your work is identifying and applying process safety management principles. So what are some of the core principles that you're working to advance regarding process safety management.
Well, Senator, thank you for the question. As you know, there are 14 aspects, 14 elements of process safety management, but I think probably the biggest simple one is on prevention and identifying causes and having plans in place so that you can anticipate problems before they arise and involve employees of the facility in identifying what the issues may be that could create problematic conditions that could result in a release or an explosion or a fire and those kinds of things. We've identified a number of issues in the course of the history of the CSB recommendations that address various elements of process safety management, but a couple of most important ones are employee involvement and also taking sort of a hierarchy of controls approach to addressing conditions that exist at facilities so that when there are conditions that could lead to an upset or a release or a fire and explosion, that there are systems in place to minimize the consequences of that if not actually prevented in the first place.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Senator Capito.
Thank you, Chairman Merkley, and thank you, Ranking Member Wicker, for having this, and thank the both of you being before the committee. Appreciate it. We're obviously considering both your nominations of Stephen Owens and Catherine Sandoval. I guess the entire board is consistent of 5, but there are presently just 2. Is that correct? Yes. Congress established, obviously, the CSB to investigate facts, conditions, and circumstances and causes of chemical releases. It's a critical role in determining, certainly for where I live, we're called Chemical Valley and for a reason. And so your role is very important to us in my home state. But we do have some question as to how the CSB has been fulfilling its responsibilities. The EPA inspector report stated that the CSB's operations are challenged by vacancies in mission-critical positions and an inability to fully use resources Congress has allocated. Further, CSB staff are concerned that leadership, internal review processes, and reported backlogs are impeding CSB's ability to accomplish its mission. The Inspector General also identified significant data vulnerabilities. And so attracting and maintaining full-time staff is difficult. I will have to say we have many boards in front of us, and you're not alone here. This is an issue, I think, government-wide as we see a turnover of people in their 60s moving on. And so, but to only have 12 chemical incident investigators who are now working on 17 open investigations, you know, what happens when we have the next accident? I mean, this you can see why everything is so delayed and the timely releases is pushed back. So one of the questions that came to mind that I have along those lines is keeping us as members of the Senate and also over on the House side apprised as to what's happened with investigations in our own states. I think Senator Wicker was talking about something that is parochial to his state. So I would ask, I think it came about that we've had an accident and we were not made aware of what the final findings were until after it was made public to the press. So, Mr. Owens, I don't know if we could elicit a promise from you that you'll take into better considerations the updates and final reports before going public. We would certainly like to have a little bit of a heads up there.
Senator, thank you for the question, and the answer is absolutely. That's a commitment that I will make here today, and it's one that we've tried to already do. I mentioned, I think before you arrived, we just released updates on 4 investigations, including the Optimabel incident in 2020 that occurred in your state. The agency had stopped doing those updates last year, but Sylvia Johnson, my fellow board member, and I determined that these provide very important information to stakeholders as well as members of the House and Senate, and we're going to continue to do that. And we're more than happy, in fact, eager to brief you and your staff on any incident and to certainly give you a heads up before we release a final report so you'll know what's going on with it.
Thank you. That would be much appreciated. Ms. Sandoval, can I elicit the same response from you that you would be more inclusive of giving us heads up and updates in our offices?
Absolutely. Would be happy to coordinate and
Thank you.
Certainly believe in transparency.
Good. And I mean, it's essential for us in order conserve our constituencies, but also to provide the best information to them. A lot of times we're working with county and city officials to make sure that we understand what the reports are saying. So we want to be helpful to you, but we also want to be helpful to those who are going to be interacting. Mr. Owens, I went through some of what the Inspector General said. Do you agree with the report that came out, and do you take any issues with the quotes that I decided to kind of handpick out of there?
Well, there have been a lot of, Senator, thank you for the question. There have been a lot of Inspector General reports, and I think most of them are right on. They're very spot on in terms of the issues they've identified with lack of board members, decreasing personnel, IT, cybersecurity issues, and we're working very hard to address all of those. I worked very closely with the EPA Inspector General when I was at EPA during the Obama administration, and I'm very appreciative of the work that they do. They've highlighted some very important issues for us to address. Well,
in terms of hiring, I mean, you do have a much higher attrition rate than the EPA. What plans does the board and the agency or the whole entity have to fill these much needed positions?
Well, Senator, thank you for the question. We've already been in the process of filling some of the more mission-critical positions. We hired a new chief information officer who's already working on a lot of the cybersecurity issues, working with the CSIA to address some of those concerns. We've hired a new chemical incident investigator already. We're in the process of advertising for another 4 or 5 more. And we've hired a couple of new recommendation specialists already, and those are the people that actually write the recommendations and work with our investigative staff to help produce the reports. But as you very correctly identified, with only 12 or so investigators who not only go into the field and do the investigations, when we do deployments, they have to come back and write those reports. They're already overloaded. And when we did the deployment to the BP Husky refinery in Ohio back in September, we had to take a half dozen or so investigators off of writing reports and send them to the field. And that's a very significant incident that occurred there. They've interviewed 100 people already in conjunction with that incident. And so we're very eager to get new staff on board, and we're working within the resource constraints we have, but we feel very optimistic that we can do that.
Well, I certainly hope you can, too. I mean, I think that these are important jobs that you're filling and important reports that you're generating, and obviously in this time of cybersecurity, extremely important in terms of some of the dangerous materials that are being produced gladly here in this country. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I think Senator Ernst was hoping to join us, but she's in another meeting right now. I'll just ask you one question. We'll see if she's returned. Did you? And we'll see. And I was thinking about the massive explosion that happened in Lebanon that leveled a good portion of a city. And does the storage of chemicals in warehouses also follow into the purview of the CSB?
Senator, thank you for the question. And yes, it does. That incident in Lebanon involved, as you know, ammonium nitrate. And one of the issues that we had in an investigation that the CSB did was in West Texas at the West Texas fertilizer facility there, where there were very, very large amounts of fertilizer-grade ammonium nitrate. That's been a big issue that the CSB has been investigating, and we're working very closely with EPA and OSHA, for that matter, both with the EPA's risk management plan proposed rule and OSHA's process safety management standard, to encourage them to take more action from a regulatory perspective in dealing with the storage of substances like fertilizer-grade ammonium nitrate. Generally, the jurisdiction of the CSB or facilities that process, use, store, handle chemical substances. It's within the parameters of the Clean Air Act, but it's a very broad jurisdiction. So,
do you ever have? I've just been alerted. A couple of the senators are trying to make their way here, so I'll fill in a little bit here. Which, after you make these recommendations, do you have any leverage in getting them implemented, or does it? What, or if that leverage exists, in what form?
Well, the biggest leverage is in the form of the persuasiveness of the recommendations themselves and their implementability. That's one of the things that the agency does when we're developing recommendations is discuss them in advance with the recipients of the recommendations to make sure that they could actually do them, because it doesn't do us any good to issue recommendations that no one can implement. But in a broader sense, we work very closely with the recommendation recipients to try to encourage them to implement them. We, especially some of the regulatory agencies, for example, EPA and OSHA, now that I and Sylvia Johnson are on the board because of the prior experiences that we've had, myself at EPA herself when working in labor organizations and being very familiar with OSHA, that we have, in a personal sense, better relationships with both those agencies, and I've already been in communication with people there about implementing some of the long-standing recommendations that we have issued to EPA and OSHA. But more importantly than that, with some of the trade associations as well as individual companies, trying to stay in touch with them on a more continuous basis so that they don't just get a recommendation from the CSB, as sometimes has happened in the past, and then the agency will check in once a year to see how it's going. And before you know it, 5, 6, or 7 years has gone by, and a recommendation has just been hanging out there without being implemented. So we're working on improving the communication with recommendation recipients, but also making sure that we are more in touch with recipients up front. So.
And you don't just want that recommendation to be implemented at that particular company, but across the scope of that industry or related circumstances.
That's correct, Senator. We historically, the agency has done a very good job of looking at issues that are broader than just the individual facility. You know, the recommendations themselves are based on the specific facts of the incidents that occurred, but especially when we've noticed patterns over the years of incidents where it's one of those things that doesn't just happen at only one facility, but either has happened or can happen in other facilities. The agency has tried to make the recommendations as broadly applicable as it can, and we're working with trade associations, for example, and with regulatory agencies really come into play. So.
And the fact that you don't issue citations, you don't deliver information for criminal prosecutions helps greatly in actually getting to the root of the problem and being able to implement, understand the challenge in a way that allows those recommendations to carry forward.
Yes, Senator, that's absolutely right. It's a non-regulatory agency, and again, our ability to get things done is dependent on the relationships that we've developed, the factual accuracy of the reports, the implementability and persuasiveness of the recommendations. But the fact that we don't have individual enforcement authority or regulatory authority as an agency, having been on the other side of that, as both as a regulator and representing parties who did work with regulators, I think I like this situation much better because we can work more closely with entities that we are investigating and really get to the causes of the problems and find solutions to them. So.
Ms. Sandoval, do you want to add anything to the points that Mr. Owens has been making?
Yes. So here's an area where I also think my academic background may be helpful because as a law professor, certainly when I write law review articles, I can recommend things, but I have no power except the power of persuasion and analysis. So even with my students, I may assign things and hopefully they'll turn in their assignments. So I am certainly accustomed to working through the power of persuasion. And I wanted to also underscore the importance of working in advance with a large group of stakeholders. I also have regulatory experience and experience in looking at root cause analysis and as well doing the enforcement side. But I think that the independence of the Chemical Safety Board is important because it really creates an opportunity, as Board Member Owens said, to look at the facts of that specific incident, but also to take a broad look at other incidents that are arising. So A couple of things that I'd like to highlight is that we have seen as well growing examples of where, for example, the loss of electricity has actually caused chemical incidents, as happened in the Arkema fire in Texas, and as well flooding. So we need to be looking forward to some of those commonalities to ensure that we're not just responsive to chemical safety incidents, but we're also thinking proactively with companies, with insurers, with communities and first responders so that we can hopefully prevent some of these incidents and damage in the future.
Thank you very much. And this, I'm going to wrap up now with 3 questions that this committee asks all nominees that appear before it. They're basically yes/no questions, but if you feel the necessity of answering in a more complicated fashion, I understand that. Press ask electeds to answer yes/no questions all the time when we see things, but I think these are important points. So I'll ask each of you, do you agree, if confirmed, to appear before this committee or designated members of this committee and other appropriate committees of the Congress and provide information subject to appropriate necessary security protections with respect to your responsibilities? Mr. Owens?
Yes, Senator.
Ms. Sandoval?
Yes, Senator.
Second, do you agree to ensure that testimony, briefings, documents, and electronic and other forms of communication of information are provided to this committee and its staff and other appropriate committees in a timely manner?
Yes, Senator Merkley.
Yes, Senator.
Thank you. Do you know of any matters which you may or may not have disclosed that might place you in a conflict of interest if you are confirmed?
No, Senator.
No, Senator.
With that, I appreciate colleagues coming to share in this hearing. And we have a standard way of wrapping up. And so I ask unanimous consent of all the committee members present to submit into the record a variety of materials related to today's hearing. Hearing no objections. So ordered. Finally, senators will be allowed to submit written questions for the record through the close of business on Wednesday, November 23rd. We will compile those questions, send them to our witnesses, who we will ask to reply by Wednesday, November 30th. So the 25th from the 30th, we'd appreciate you giving intense attention to any questions that are submitted. And with that, this hearing is now adjourned, except before I hit the gavel, just thank you for working to address such important issues and being willing to serve the American public in this capacity. The hearing is adjourned.